Alrighty, we are done with our GP run this month. Unfortunately, we have been knocked out at a record of 1 and 2. So we are no longer in contention for the top cut, and for the sake of my own well-being, with all of the work I have to do to prepare for rotation, I'm going to hold off on playing a round 4 for the sake of content and prioritize getting the GQ Chaos Reigns set review to you all in a timely manner. So let's talk about uh, where I have misstepped in the preparations for GP 4th Street, namely in how I misinterpreted where the meta would be going and ran into some proper unfavorable matchups as a result. I, described very heavily across like my deck tech and just sort of in my preparations that persist combo was the deck I feared would be omnipresent in the tournament. I figured there was going to be 4+ players on persist combo and that it was going to really truly reign supreme. I was a little suspicious of its lack of presence in the deck lists channel, but my suspicion of the reason behind that was largely centered on suspecting that people were working on tuning the deck, not really finishing league runs. The moment they get a single loss, they would scrap the league and start again with a new deck list, and as a result, not really get 5 games on a particular deck list, and instead just be iterating on the deck and trying to avoid getting it in deck lists for the sake of having their specific tuned brew be a surprise to people in the GP. And with that in mind, I wanted to be prepared for persist. So, 4 of Dishonor, 4 of Succumb to History, exile the things out of persist, so that way we don't have to worry about it. And then we have Heroes Never Die and Yeji to fight further with Dishonor, moving forward from there. However, there are some decisions in deck building that I made that were just pure oversight in terms of where I got myself. And I think that is in part because I hindered my time I had available to me in preparing for the tournament, in part to get the Eternal Guides out to you all in a timely manner. Case in point, the part 3 to the Eternal Guide went up about a quarter of a day ahead of deck lists being locked in, and that was not a good sign. So I didn't have a whole lot of time to actually play test decks for preparing, and you can kind of feel that in some of my deck building choices. Granite Harbinger. I was very optimistic about Granite Harbinger. I still think this is a very solid card, and there are matchups that we could have gotten into where Granite Harbinger would have been nice. However, this was a card largely aimed at a meta that did not show up. I was bracing for a lot of tempo to show up at the tournament trying to fight persist, and tempo isn't really a part of the field. And so as a result, Granite Harbinger kind of looks really awkward. I think I maybe should have looked at boarding it out, but the problem is I do still want a lot of creature hits, and I do still want, things to do in the early turns that can help grind the game out. But the reality is that Granite Harbinger is not very well tuned to the environment that I ended up walking into. Smirk, I feel iffy on. I think Smirk is, one of the better statted minions, one of the better statted creatures we could be packing in our deck. But the fact of the matter is that Evil Plan is seldom the best thing I have going on, and the times where the Evil Plan is going to matter are cases where I'm either just scraping against the wall trying to get something, or I'm in such a commanding position that the Evil Plan was just kind of unnecessary. And the one time that we did get to play the Evil Plan, it was to cast a spell we had just top decked to win the game, so it's not like that was a particularly remarkable thing. However, I do think Smirk could still be good in this deck. It would just require a bit of a rework to the list. Diabolical Minion was not impressed with in this deck. I think more than any other card in the deck, I really wish I had gotten off the Diabolical Minion train and come to the consensus that, this card is very good, but wants to be doing something very different than what this deck was aiming to accomplish. It is very good for some of the things that we have going on. It mitigates the life loss from Fenax's Confidant. It mitigates the life loss from Smirk. It mitigates the life loss from Dormant Temple. But the problem is that we do not have a bunch of spells that we are casting alongside Diabolical Minion. We are not a super aggressive deck, so we aren't capitalizing on the damage we are dealing to our opponent with Diabolical Minion. We're really just using it as kind of like a Soul Warden, and that's not good when our Soul Warden's hurting us half the time, because we do have the Yeegis and we do have the Heroes Never Die, and those were absolutely coming up in some of our games. So, so one of the things that I'm really struggling with is, the premise of this deck was, Minion mid-range trying to like get in on Diabolical Minion, and I think the best version of this deck is one that lacks Diabolical Minion and Granite Harbinger. So where do we go if not Diabolical Minion and Granite Harbinger? There are two cards that were recommended to me that I feel like there was one card that was recommended to me that I feel like really should have been on my consider list beforehand, and one that I think I really should have looked at more carefully that I've kind of been off of ever since it was nerfed. So we'll start with the one that was recommended to me, which is Ignited Soul. I should not have missed Ignited Soul. I think if I had been spending more time thinking about Ignited Soul, I would have been playing it over Granite Harbinger. This does what we need it to do. It, helps us find the cards we need it to find, helps us get rid of cards that are dead in the matchup. In that last match, we could have pitched our Succumb to History, our Twilight Ambush to try to dig deeper. We could pitch excess lands to try and dig deeper. And really, try and salvage a bad situation. And more importantly, the Ignited Soul can pitch things like Dishonor, like Voidmist Prodigy, like Smirk into the graveyard for Heroes Never Die, thereby getting us set up to, take advantage of Heroes Never Die and Heroes Never Die to actually cheat things rather than just getting back stuff we've already played. So Ignited Soul definitely should have been in contention for this deck. I kind of just glossed over it, and that is something I do genuinely have regret over. The other thing that I feel like I really should have considered is Feast of Whispered Knives. Ever since this was nerfed to become a legendary enchantment, I have been kind of generally just off of Feast of Whispered Knives, like a lot less enthusiastic about it, a lot less confident in it. But the fact of the matter is, Feast of Whispered Knives does grind phenomenally well. And it is one of those cards that our opponents will want to try and pick out of play the first chance they get. It works well with Ignited Soul, as we've shown in the past on this channel, but on top of Ignited Soul, it also works well with Phalanx's Confidant, drawing us cards, Smirk, drawing us extra cards, Voidmist Prodigy, gaining us life. So, you look at our 2-drop slot, and our 2-drop slot is exclusively things that trigger Feast of Whispered Knives. And if we were on Ignited Soul instead of Granite Harbinger, our 1-drop slot is something that can trigger Feast of Whispered Knives. So, there was a real merit to this being a very solid Feast of Whispered Knives deck with 3 or 4 copies, and we just weren't there. And that is purely just a result, again, of that time crunch of trying to get on what I thought was the most effective version of this deck against Persist, while kind of being blind to the rest of the field and not really thinking about what makes this deck best overall. And even then, I don't think the Granite Harbinger and Diabolical Minion were as good into Persist as I was hoping they would be. So, Ignited Soul, Feast of Whispered Knives, I think are really important. Where I would take this deck, I will show in just a moment, but otherwise, I think the Mountain also was more cute than good. Oftentimes, I just kind of felt like I was never going to want to cast Rampage anyways. I think 2 of Raise really is the cap I am comfortable at with this deck. I think the fact of the matter is, even with more 2-drops, I'm not super keen on using Raise to get back my 2-drops. The Voidmist Prodigy, shoot for 6 for both uses of Raise is very, very real and very appealing, and was kind of why Raise is in the deck in the first place. And getting back Confidant and Smirk is still very good as well, but I think, going over to Raise is a mistake. Finally, as far as deck building choices go, Event Horizon felt okay. Twilight Ambush, I should not have been playing in the sideboard. I felt very mediocre on it being in the main deck. Memory Hostage, I should have had down to 1 or 2 copies. I should have had 1 or 2 copies of Memory Hostage. I should have had 2 copies of Agonizing Remorse, and I should have had either an extra copy of Transgressed Identity, or possibly even shave this out for more interaction on other vectors. I should have looked at more larger removal, things capable of taking out more than just what Succumb to History is capable of and what Event Horizon is capable of. Wilderkin Behemoth very much was something that proved to be a problem, and I didn't really come with any plan for a handful of like larger creatures that were going to be a pain in my butt. And Fatal Flaw really isn't the answer to that problem either, because again, protection from or hexproof from mana value 3 or less, that's not going to help us against Wilderkin Behemoth. So I should have looked at something like Ominous Slaughter in the sideboard, perhaps. Anything that I could have played that would have had a chance of doing meaningful interaction that I kind of just skipped out on and was feeling the absence. So I'm going to take a moment to rebuild just the main deck. I'm going to leave the sideboard untouched, but just sort of rebuilding the main deck just real quick so I can show you my thoughts on where a better version of this deck could have landed. So I think if I had taken a bit more time to prepare for the tournament, this is something closer to what I would have registered going into this tournament. As mentioned, we've got Ignited Souls, Ominous Slaughters, Feast of Whispered Knives. I just shave the Rave's Rampages completely. I think ultimately, the Voidmist Prodigy Dream is kind of neat, but using to get back Phoenix's Confidant or Smirk is kind of underwhelming. And one of the things that I think might come as a surprise is, even after talking about, Smirk being kind of underwhelming, why suddenly go up on Smirk in that regard? And the answer is twofold. The first reason is Heroes Never Die. Being able to gain 2 life actually has proven to be pretty relevant off of Heroes Never Die in playtesting, and I wish I would have been able to gain 2 life off of it more consistently. Feast of Whispered Knives does, of course, give us a legendary permanent to get into play with with heroes that gains us life, but more copies of Smirk also does much the same. The other thing that more copies of Smirk does very well is... or the second thing of 3, actually. The second thing that Smirk does really well in more multiples is give us more ways to add things to our evil plan. If we're getting Smirk back from our graveyard with Yeji or Heroes Never Die, and just playing more copies of Smirk onto the board, we will eventually build up enough of a sizable evil plan that if the game grinds out that late, it's not terrible to actually just pop our evil plan and play a bunch of spells out of our exile in an instant. We might get to a point of actually being able to use that 7 mana to cast more than 7 mana worth of spells, which is, pretty remarkable, all things considered. And then the third thing that Smirk does that's really important is just help turn on Phoenix's Confidant. I think one of the things that I found in all of this is if I had built the deck better, to be more equipped to consistently and reliably trigger Phoenix's Confidant, I probably would have had a lot more success, because the times when I felt the most in control of the game were the times when Phoenix's Confidant was rolling and was giving my opponent hell by just burying them in card advantage. Even round 1 against that Naya mid-range deck, we had some phenomenally close games, thanks in part to Phoenix's Confidant buying us that time, being able to grind out our opponent and keep up the attrition battle. So Confidant really would have shown better. And one of the things that otherwise that we get to take advantage of here is we go up to a total of 30 permanents, 30 non-land permanents in the deck, 27 of which are fetchable off of Heroes Never Die, which I believe previously we only had Dishonor, and we had 2 more creatures. Sorry, because we took out, we added 2 Smirk, 4 Ignited Soul, and we took out 8 creatures. So we had 2 more creatures, but 7 less enchantments. So we go up 5 more permanents to hit off of Heroes Never Die. So this is just more reliable. And again, we take out the mountain because we are no longer trying to make Raise Rampage work. Maybe if you wanted to sideboard Raise Rampage, you could like throw the mountain to the sideboard, but that's just kind of neither here nor there. So hopefully this has given you some interesting things to think about. There is still half a month to go in the Eternal Revolution season. So if you'd like to try out something like this deck, I highly recommend you try and tune it, tinker with it, see if it gives you more success in League than it gave me success in the GP, because I do think that despite my missteps and my miscalculations with the tournament, there is absolutely something to be found here that is very likely to be potent and powerful. I may even, if I find myself with a bit of free time, try jamming a league of my own. Maybe not necessarily for videos, just kind of focusing on getting video content up for preparations for next month, but perhaps just as a leisurely, like, trying to get some time to see if I can't get this into the deck lists channel or something akin to this. So with all of that said, thank you so much for tuning in to my run through the Grand Prix 4th Street. Good luck to the remaining competitors. From what I understand, there is still a lot of people who are in contention for the top cut. I believe, yeah, we still got 9 people fighting for seats at the top cut, and highly likely that a lot of them are going to get into that top cut. So going to be a fun top cut to spectate when I can, and I'll even see if I can hop into recording the finals when they happen. So hope you all take care. Have a lovely rest of your 2024. And I will be back here soon with videos preparing you for the January rotation with GQ Chaos Reigns. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you in the Revolution chat.